Greetings, fellow songwriters and seekers, and welcome back to Muse and Measure. If you haven't done so yet, please hit that subscribe button down below. It's my goal to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of November, and things are going well. We're heading that direction, thanks to you. One of our viewers wrote in, Greg Chandran. He said, "I'd like your thoughts on using common metaphors, the good, the bad, the indifferent." Thank you, Greg. That's an excellent point to bring up. I've talked a little bit about common metaphors, or I call them clichés, in previous episodes, especially the one about editing your lyrics. And I really went on about how you want to search for these clichés in your writing and get rid of them and replace them with something that's much more sensory-based. Now, why aren't these common metaphors or clichés sensory-based? Well, they could be, and maybe originally they were, but they've just been overused so many times that impact has been washed away by just the repetition of them. And I really don't like clichés because there's something ideological about them. They're kind of shoving some kind of truth down your throat. By mere repetition, they become these truisms where they're not open to debate anymore. They're non-negotiables. I hate that term. And so your mind doesn't become engaged with them, and so they become boring. When you've heard something over and over and over again, your mind is just the way our minds work. We turn our sensory experience into concepts. And the older we get and the more concepts we have, the more dead the world is for us. And it becomes more and more a struggle to re-enliven life in that way and to become enamored with objects and the senses, the more clichés you have. Because that's just how our mind has adapted to survive in this world. Just walking around, every little thing you see is either something to eat or is a danger or maybe something neutral. But the way we have learned to survive and become the dominant species on the planet is this capacity to be able to turn things into concepts and into knowledge. But the downside of it is that the magical world of awe, the inspired sense of being that we think that children have, and we kind of remember when we were children, that goes away. If you want to read a great poem about this, the Intimations of Mortality by Wordsworth is all about this, his losing his awe of nature and the ecstasies that he had as a child just being out in nature. So these clichés are just kind of, the sores, the cankers of this kind of mindset. And the more our speech gets filled with them, the less articulate we are, and it just shows a kind of laziness of the mind, and one that's too riddled by not actually thinking, where there's an actual process going on, where there's engagement and absorption, but just like ready-made, canned responses to every situation. And I think you can recognize this in other people better than you can yourself. Because if you have a friend or a family member that just seems to keep repeating themselves in the things they say, it gets very, very annoying, and you just think, wow, they're just on autopilot. There's no thinking actually going on there where they're actually considering and drawing out all the implications of every situation, trying to figure it out. They just have a canned, ready response, usually based in some kind of fear or prejudice. So I don't like common metaphors, but we can bring them back to life. We can resuscitate the words. The power of creativity is to take the dead language and to take all this dead stuff from the world and re-enliven it again, and to show people things in a new way, even if it's something that they see every single day. So what are these common metaphors and clichés? I can read you a short list of them. Time is money, love is a battlefield, life is a journey, the world's a stage, having a heart of stone, she's a shining star, it's a double-edged sword, you're my rock, he's a snake in the grass, it's raining cats and dogs, don't open that can of worms, etc., etc., etc. To take up a metaphor that we're going to talk about in a second, everything in its right place. Well, so you see that because of the repetition of these things, they just become something that's kind of forcing it on you. Like somebody says it, they're not saying it to bring up a possible conversation point. It's to shut you up. It's to shut you down. Everything in its right place according to who? Boys will be boys. Well, what the hell does that even mean? It assumes a whole ideological structure about what it is to be a boy, what the behaviors are, and that there's some kind of nature to that, and that we're supposed to accept that and not push against it. And we're living in this world of toxic masculinity and where we have to deal with all these issues. And men have to deal with it even more now because they're expected to be men on one hand, but also be sensitive and caring people and have a sensitive feminine side. Anyways, I'm digressing. I could spend hours talking about this stuff. I just don't like cliches. But, as I said, you can do stuff with them, which is really cool. And for me, the lyrical masters of this are Radiohead, Tom York, and what they do with cliches. In fact, a lot of their lyrical content, or at least the subject matter or the inspiration for their songs, come from these cliches. You and whose army? That's one example. It's something that kids say, or you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to beat you up. Yeah, you and whose army? Everything in its right place, which I just mentioned before. Fitter, happier. That's another great example. So I want to talk a little bit about those and how they take the cliche, the common metaphors, and kind of turn them on their heads. And they do this kind of magic trick, which is called defamiliarization. And this was first theorized by Viktor Shklovsky. And it's basically where you take these common metaphors, these popular items, could be pop songs, could be anything that's just a common everyday item, whether they're cliches or just like a Campbell soup can, like Andy Warhol did. And you make them all of a sudden defamiliar, or you unfamiliarize them through a process. And there's different ways of defamiliarizing things. One of the most effective ways is by repetition. So just repeating things, especially a cliche over and over and over again, it starts to take on a different resonance, and it starts to draw attention to itself and deconstruct itself. This is something that Gertrude Stein would do. Even with her own name, she would just say Gertrude Stein over and over and over again, so it became absurd. And then she would say that over and over again, and then when she got to a point where her name sounded totally absurd to her, because it is. I mean, even these sounds I'm making right now are just kind of arbitrary and absurd. That's the nature of language. But since our mind is filtering them and attaching concepts to them, it makes sense to us all of a sudden. But on the basic level, these little weird sounds I'm making are kind of totally absurd and arbitrary. And Gertrude Stein tapped into that and used that as a point to kind of enliven her own mental state and re-enliven her senses, so that what is closest to home, her own name, all of a sudden becomes something that is defamiliarized. And if that is defamiliarized, like the sense of ego, then the whole world opens up. And so she would say her name over and over again, and then once it got to that state, that was the time to start writing, because then your senses are enlivened. So Radiohead does this, I mentioned before, everything in its right place. By repeating that over and over and over again, it becomes this kind of diatribe, and it becomes obsessive, kind of like a psychosis. It no longer is just like everything in its right place, ho-hum, this kind of smug contentment. It all of a sudden becomes something that becomes an obsession. Yesterday I woke up sucking on a lemon, that line. And there's other lines in that song that really kind of deconstruct this idea of what is the familiar and what is the cliche. The fact that Tom York repeats this over and over again, it becomes like a mantra, and it's kind of deadpan the way he sings it too. So it becomes more like an order. You're trying to set some kind of order to the chaos. And what comes forth is not this kind of classical sense that everything is as it should be, and the world is a beautiful place and we are celebrating it. It's more like, oh my God, the world is totally chaotic, and I have to have this mantra of everything in its right place. I've got to keep control, like with a tight fist, in order to keep everything in its right place. So there's this kind of frenetic, kind of psychotic energy to it that counteracts that truism of everything in its right place, that ideological aspect of it. So it gives it new life. It reopens it up. So you take that cliche, everything in its right place, and you turn it on its head, and it becomes something totally new. Another example from the Radiohead catalog is Fitter, Happier, and this one is, I think, one of the more obvious ones. You have all these basically to-do lists and ways of, quote-unquote, being the full human being, living your life to the fullest, taking care of yourself health-wise and career-wise, and basically checking all the boxes. So as if like life was that easy, that as long as you did these set of things, then you'd be set and you're going to just be in a perfect state of being. Get to that state of smugness again. And Fitter, Happier is just like, could be the title of a self-help book. I'm sure there are books that have that in their title. As if life was that clean and easy, that if you just did these things, everything would be taken care of. Well, Radiohead takes all this list of to-dos and advice for, living this fitter, healthier life, and has a robotic voice saying it. I think maybe they even fed it into a computer to be read out by an automated voice. And so this takes all those cliches, and it's basically a whole list of cliches from the self-help community, and it's said by a robotic voice over this kind of dead, automated music in the background that gives you this sense of a dead world. So by doing all these things that are supposed to be, smoothing off the edges of life and making it so we reduce our pain and maximize our pleasure, you're basically becoming this automaton that lives in this dystopian state. So these are great ways of taking, these cliches that we see, and they're all around us. You can just, go through this YouTube channel or through the reels and find all kinds of them if you want to work with cliché and common metaphors. Lastly, I'll talk about the great artist Marcel Duchamp, who did this in the art world. He took common everyday objects, what he called ready-mades, and these are things that people just wouldn't look at normally, like a shovel or a bicycle wheel, or his most extreme example, a urinal. And he put them inside of an art gallery. And by putting him, talk about defamiliarization, you just transplant it from its location and its context, and you put it in a new context. Then all of a sudden you have an aesthetic object. So something that you would use to piss into, and you would not pay attention to unless it was broken, all of a sudden you're paying attention to it and looking at it for its aesthetic quality. Same goes for the shovel and the bicycle wheel. And I think a lot of people, when they go to the art galleries or museums and they see these pieces, they don't get it. They just think, oh, that's dumb. How is that art? Well, what makes it art is it re-enlivens the thing, and it makes us look at it with new eyes. And that's the whole purpose of art, to take something that we just took for granted or never even really engaged with its being even, unless it's broken, of course. Then we often engage with things when they're broken and consider them. But we're so frustrated that we're not going to have this kind of neutral, objective, purely aesthetic, sensory experience of it. You take these objects and you put them in an art gallery, and all of a sudden they are on display to be looked at and be experienced in that way, which is brilliant. And that's a great way to turn something, the common everyday, what has become the cliche, the common, and turn it back into something that is new. As Ezra Pound's slogan said, make it new. So that's the task for using common metaphors. And country music, I'm not going to get into it here, but country music does this brilliantly. They take all kinds of cliche phrases and things like that. Or even some of the cliches of country music, like my girl with, wearing her tight blue jeans, driving down the road with a six-pack and my pickup truck and a dog and all that stuff. Some songs really take that and they turn it on its head. I don't get into that in future episodes. But you can do this with your songwriting, especially if you hear somebody say something that is a cliche and you think of it in a new way. You can really take that and make it an extended metaphor for a song and really blow it up and see all kinds of new possibilities. And take something that's a dead, common, cliche metaphor and breathe new life into it. Well, if you do that, I'd love to hear it, so please share it down in the comments below. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, please put those down below as well. And I wish you the best of luck with your songwriting and spiritual practice. Until next time, take care.